The silence after the scream was the worst part. They stood over me, grins plastered on their faces as the life I'd built crumbled into dust. The weight of their betrayal pressed down, suffocating, a cold dread washing over me as I realized the depth of their cruelty. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken me beyond repair. They were wrong. If your family is everything to you, subscribe right now to hear stories of those who protect them at all costs. The family reunion had been my idea, a chance to reconnect with everyone after years of scattered holidays and hurried phone calls. I'd always been the glue that held our sprawling, sometimes chaotic family together. I booked a sprawling cabin in the mountains, envisioning cozy nights by the fire, laughter echoing through the pines, and the warm embrace of belonging. My brother-in-law, David, had seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the trip, even offering to help with the planning. His wife, Sarah, my sister, had been unusually affectionate, showering me with compliments and seemingly sincere gratitude. I should have seen the cracks then, the subtle shifts in their behavior that hinted at the storm brewing beneath the surface. My name is Mackenzie, and I've always been a trusting soul, a trait that would soon become my greatest weakness. The first few days were exactly as I'd hoped. We hiked scenic trails, played silly games, and shared stories around the bonfire. David, ever the charmer, kept everyone entertained with his witty jokes and boisterous personality. Sarah, usually reserved, seemed to blossom in the relaxed atmosphere, laughing freely and engaging in heartfelt conversations. I even started to believe that maybe, just maybe, our family was finally finding its way back to the close-knit bond we'd once shared. The day before we were all set to leave, David cornered me after dinner, a conspiratorial glint in his eyes. He told me about a fantastic investment opportunity, a sure thing that would double my money in a matter of months. He painted a vivid picture of financial freedom, early retirement, and a life free from worry. I hesitated, explaining that most of my savings were earmarked for a down payment on a small house, a dream I'd been carefully nurturing for years. He brushed my concerns aside, assuring me that this investment was the key to unlocking a future far grander than any modest home. He pressured me, playing on my desire for security and my trust in him as family. I resisted, but he kept pushing, relentlessly chipping away at my resolve. Later that evening, Sarah joined the conversation, adding her voice to David's persuasive arguments. She spoke of their own financial struggles, hinting at mounting debts and the constant pressure to provide for their children. Her words tugged at my heartstrings. I knew they'd been struggling since David's business had taken a downturn. I cared about them. I wanted them to be happy. I wanted to help. I finally relented, agreeing to consider the investment. They seemed overjoyed, showering me with hugs and promises of gratitude. I felt a pang of unease, a nagging sense that I was making a mistake, but I pushed it aside, telling myself that I was simply helping family in need. The next morning, after everyone had packed and said their goodbyes, I logged into my bank account to transfer the agreed-upon sum. That's when I saw it. The balance was zero. Every single penny gone. Panic seized me, a cold fist clenching around my heart. I frantically checked the transaction history, my eyes scanning the screen, desperately searching for an explanation. There it was, a series of large withdrawals, all made within the last 24 hours. My blood ran cold. I knew without a shadow of a doubt who was responsible. I confronted David and Sarah as they were loading their car, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. David simply smirked, a cruel glint in his eyes. "We needed it more than you," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Sarah stood beside him, her expression unreadable. The person I trusted most was one of them. The silence after the scream was the worst part. They stood over me, grins plastered on their faces as the life I'd built crumbled into dust. The weight of their betrayal pressed down, suffocating, a cold dread washing over me as I realized the depth of their cruelty. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken me beyond repair. They were wrong. The accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy, but David's response was a casual shrug. "Prove it," he challenged, his eyes hard and devoid of any remorse. Sarah remained silent, her gaze fixed on the ground, seemingly unwilling to meet my gaze. I felt a surge of nausea, a sickening realization that these people, my family, were capable of such heartless cruelty. The drive home was a blur of tears and disbelief. I replayed the events of the past few days in my mind, searching for any clue I might have missed, any warning sign that could have alerted me to their deception. The house felt empty and cold, devoid of the warmth and comfort it had once held. The dream I had worked so hard for, the down payment I had painstakingly saved, was gone, vanished in an instant by the people I had trusted most. I tried to call them later that evening, hopping against hope that it was all a terrible misunderstanding, that there was some logical explanation for what had happened. But my calls went straight to voicemail. They had blocked me. Sleepless nights followed, filled with anxious thoughts and a gnawing sense of injustice. I couldn't eat, couldn't concentrate, couldn't shake the image of David's smug grin and Sarah's averted eyes. I felt violated, stripped bare, not just financially, but emotionally. The betrayal cut deeper than any monetary loss. It was the shattering of trust, the realization that the people I had considered family were capable of such calculated cruelty. I considered going to the police, but I hesitated. The thought of dragging my family through a legal battle, the potential for even more pain and embarrassment, held me back. Besides, David was clever. I knew he would have covered his tracks, making it nearly impossible to prove his guilt. I felt trapped, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. I tried to confide in other family members, hoping for support and understanding, but I was met with skepticism and doubt. David and Sarah had always been master manipulators, adept at portraying themselves as victims. They had likely already spun their own version of the story, casting me as the unstable, unreliable one. I was alone, isolated by their lies and my own sense of shame. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of the injustice grew heavier with each passing moment. I lost my appetite, my sleep, my ability to focus on anything other than the burning desire for retribution. I started losing weight, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. My friends noticed my withdrawal, my haunted eyes, but I brushed off their concerns, unwilling to burden them with my troubles. I became obsessed with finding a way to get my money back, to expose David and Sarah for who they truly were. I spent hours researching online, searching for legal loopholes, investment scams, anything that could give me an edge, but I found nothing. David had been too careful. He had covered his tracks too well. I felt like I was hitting a brick wall, my frustration mounting with each dead end. I even considered confronting them again, demanding that they return my money, but I knew it would be futile. They would deny everything, gaslight me, and leave me feeling even more defeated. The anger inside me simmered, slowly transforming into a cold, calculating rage. I knew I couldn't let them get away with this. I couldn't let them destroy my life and walk away unscathed. I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to turn the tables on them and make them pay for what they had done. But what? I was one person against two seasoned liars. I needed something they didn't suspect, something they wouldn't see coming. The following weeks were a descent into darkness. I lost my job, unable to focus on the demanding tasks, my mind constantly replaying the betrayal. The overdue bills piled up, each one a stark reminder of my dwindling resources. I stopped answering the phone, avoiding friends and family, retreating further into my self-imposed isolation. I was a shell of my former self, consumed by anger, resentment, and a crushing sense of helplessness. One rainy afternoon, I found myself standing on the edge of a bridge, the swirling water below mirroring the turmoil in my soul. The thought of simply letting go, of escaping the pain and the humiliation, was a tempting one. The world would be better off without me, I reasoned, a burden lifted from everyone's shoulders. But then a flicker of defiance sparked within me, a refusal to let David and Sarah win. If I ended it all, they would get away with it, free to enjoy the life they had stolen from me. The image of their smug faces fueled my resolve. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I wouldn't let them break me completely. I stepped back from the edge, my body trembling, but my mind strangely clear. The desire for vengeance, dormant until now, surged to the forefront, eclipsing the despair. It was no longer about the money. It was about justice. It was about making them pay for the pain they had inflicted. I went home, my clothes soaked, my spirit renewed. I sat at my kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating the darkness, and began to strategize. I needed information leverage, something that could expose their lies and bring them down. I started with their social media accounts, meticulously combing through their posts, their photos, their connections, searching for any hint of wrongdoing. I spent hours poring over David's business records, his online transactions, anything that could shed light on his financial dealings. It was a painstaking process, but I was driven by a newfound determination, a burning desire to uncover the truth. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece together a picture of their lives. It wasn't pretty. David's business wasn't just struggling, it was a house of cards built on deceit and shady dealings. He had been lying about his income, hiding assets, and engaging in all sorts of questionable practices. Sarah, too, was complicit, turning a blind eye to his activities and benefiting from his ill-gotten gains. I discovered a hidden bank account in her name, filled with money that couldn't be accounted for. The more I dug, the more dirt I uncovered. I realized that their betrayal wasn't just a one-time act of desperation. It was a pattern of behavior, a way of life. They had been conning people for years, preying on their trust and vulnerability. And now they had chosen me as their latest victim. But they had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, easily manipulated. They thought I would simply accept my fate and move on. They were wrong. I was no longer the trusting, naive person they had taken advantage of. I was something else entirely. I was a force to be reckoned with, fueled by a righteous anger and a burning desire for revenge. My apartment transformed into a war room. Documents were taped to the walls, timelines were drawn on whiteboards, and every inch of space was covered with notes and diagrams. I barely slept, barely ate, my entire existence consumed by my plan. I became a master of disguise, learning how to hack into secure systems, how to track online activity, how to gather information without leaving a trace. I was like a shadow, moving silently in the darkness, observing their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I knew that my plan had to be flawless. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. David and Sarah were cunning and ruthless, and they wouldn't hesitate to retaliate if they suspected anything. I had to be smarter, faster, and more determined than they were. The isolation which had once threatened to consume me now became my greatest weapon. I was invisible, untraceable, a ghost in their lives. They had no idea what was coming. They were living in a fool's paradise, confident in their ability to outsmart everyone. But their arrogance would be their downfall. They had underestimated the power of a wounded soul, the lengths to which a person would go to reclaim their life. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I was ready to fight back. The day they stole from me was the day they signed their own destruction. They just didn't know it yet. I decided to play their game to lull them into a false sense of security. I started accepting their calls, feigning forgiveness, acting as if I had moved on. I even met them for lunch, forcing a smile as they regaled me with stories of their success. Inside, I was seething, every word they uttered a fresh wound. But I kept my composure, knowing that my time would come. During these meetings, I subtly steered the conversation towards their business dealings, asking seemingly innocent questions, probing for weaknesses. I recorded everything, every word, every inflection, every nervous tick. I needed evidence, irrefutable proof of their guilt, and I was determined to get it. My phone became my most valuable weapon, a silent observer, capturing their lies and their arrogance. They never suspected a thing, convinced that they had outsmarted me completely. They were so blinded by their own greed that they couldn't see the storm brewing beneath the surface. One evening, Sarah called, her voice unusually sweet. She invited me to a party at their house, a celebration of David's latest business triumph. I hesitated, my initial instinct to refuse, but then I realized that this was the perfect opportunity to gather more information. I accepted, telling her how happy I was for them, all the while plotting my next move. The night of the party arrived, and I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was both elegant and unassuming. I wanted to blend in, to observe without drawing attention to myself. As I walked through the door, I was greeted by a cacophony of laughter and music. The house was lavishly decorated, a testament to their newfound wealth. David greeted me with a hug, his eyes glinting with a mixture of triumph and unease. I smiled sweetly, pretending to be genuinely happy for him, all the while scanning the room, searching for potential targets. I mingled with the guests, eavesdropping on conversations, noting who was who seemed to be close to David and Sarah, and who seemed to be on the periphery. I paid particular attention to David's business associates, the men who seemed to be pulling the strings behind the scenes. They were a slick bunch, dressed in expensive suits, their faces etched with a mixture of ambition and ruthlessness. I knew that they held the key to unlocking David's empire, and I was determined to find a way to get to them. As the night wore on, I noticed David slip away from the party, disappearing into his study. I followed him discreetly, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew this was my chance. I waited outside the door, listening for any sounds, any indication of what he was doing. After a few minutes, I heard him talking on the phone, his voice low and conspiratorial. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear every word. He was discussing a deal, a big one, involving a substantial amount of money. He was talking about offshore accounts, shell corporations, and other shady tactics. It was all coming together. I had found my leverage. I needed to find a way to record the conversation. I discreetly pulled out a small recording device from my purse, activated it, and slipped it under the door. It was a risky move, but I was willing to take the chance. I waited anxiously, my nerves on edge, hoping that the device would capture everything. After what seemed like an eternity, David emerged from the study, his face flushed with excitement. He rejoined the party, oblivious to the fact that his secrets had just been exposed. I retrieved the recording device, my hands trembling with anticipation. I had what I needed. Back at my apartment, I listened to the recording, my eyes widening with each passing word. David's voice was clear and unmistakable, outlining his plans in excruciating detail. He was even more corrupt than I had imagined. I transcribed the entire conversation, highlighting the most incriminating parts. This was the smoking gun, the evidence that would bring him down. But I couldn't just hand it over to the police. I needed a plan, a way to expose him publicly, to ruin his reputation, to make him suffer the same humiliation and pain that he had inflicted on me. I decided to leak the information to the media, to a journalist I knew who specialized in investigative reporting. I had met her years ago at a conference, and we had stayed in touch. I trusted her implicitly. I contacted her, telling her that I had a story that she wouldn't believe, a story that would expose a web of corruption and deceit. She was intrigued, and we agreed to meet the following day. I spent the rest of the night preparing my case, gathering all the evidence I had collected, organizing it in a clear and concise manner. I wanted to make sure that she understood the full scope of David's crimes, that she wouldn't dismiss it as just a family squabble. I knew that this was my one shot, my chance to finally get justice. I couldn't afford to mess it up. The next day, I met the journalist at a coffee shop, my heart pounding in my chest. I laid out my case, presenting her with the recording, the transcripts, and all the supporting documents. She listened intently, her eyes widening with each new revelation. When I was finished, she sat in silence for a moment, absorbing everything she had heard. Then she looked at me, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm going to run with this," she said. "This is a huge story." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally happening. My plan was working. The journalist worked quickly, verifying my information, corroborating my sources, building an airtight case. She contacted David for comment, giving him a chance to respond to the allegations. He denied everything, of course, claiming that it was all a fabrication, a smear campaign orchestrated by a disgruntled family member. But the journalist wasn't buying it. She had the evidence, the recording, the transcripts, and she was ready to go public. The story broke a week later, appearing on the front page of the newspaper and on every major news website. The headline screamed, "Local businessman exposed in massive fraud scheme." The article detailed David's crimes in excruciating detail, outlining his shady business dealings, his offshore accounts, and his betrayal of trust. The public was outraged. David's reputation was shattered. His business was ruined. His life was over. Sarah, too, was implicated in the scandal, accused of being complicit in his crimes. She denied any involvement, claiming that she had no knowledge of his activities, but no one believed her. She was ostracized by her friends and family, her life reduced to rubble. They lost everything, and I just smiled. My plan was complete. Justice had been served. The satisfaction was immense, a wave of pure vindication washing over me. But I knew this was just the beginning. Destroying their reputation and their business was a good start, but it wasn't enough. I wanted them to suffer, to feel the same despair and humiliation that they had inflicted on me. I wanted them to lose everything, to be stripped bare, left with nothing but the consequences of their actions. And I had a plan. I had discovered their weakness, their Achilles heel. It wasn't their money, it wasn't their status, it was their marriage. They presented a united front to the world, a picture of marital bliss, but I knew the truth. Their relationship was a sham, a facade built on lies and secrets. David was having an affair with his secretary, a young woman named Emily. I had stumbled upon their correspondence while hacking into David's email account. The messages were explicit, filled with passion and longing. They had been seeing each other for months, meeting in secret, exchanging gifts, and whispering sweet nothings. Sarah had no idea. She was completely oblivious to her husband's infidelity. This was my leverage. This was the weapon I would use to tear them apart. I decided to reveal David's affair to Sarah to shatter her illusion of happiness, to expose the man she thought she knew. It was a cruel move, I knew, but I didn't care. They deserved it. They had destroyed my life, and now it was my turn to return the favor. I crafted an anonymous email, attaching copies of David's emails and photos of him and Emily together. I made sure the photos were extra spicy, really detailed. I sent the email to Sarah, knowing that it would detonate like a bomb in her carefully constructed world. I waited anxiously for her reaction, constantly checking my phone, wondering what she would do. A few hours later, I received a call from her. Her voice was trembling, barely audible. She demanded to know who I was, how I had gotten this information. I remained silent, refusing to reveal my identity. I simply told her that she deserved to know the truth, that David had been deceiving her for months, that their marriage was a lie. She hung up on me, sobbing uncontrollably. I imagined her confronting David, accusing him of betrayal, watching as their perfect world crumbled around them. The thought brought a smile to my face. Later that day, I received another call from Sarah. This time, her voice was filled with rage. She accused me of trying to ruin her life, of being a jealous and bitter person. She threatened to expose me, to make me pay for what I had done. I laughed, telling her that she had no idea who she was dealing with, that I was always 10 steps ahead of her. I hung up, blocking her number, cutting off all contact. I knew that she would be furious, desperate for revenge, but I wasn't afraid. I had anticipated her reaction, and I was prepared for anything she might throw at me. I knew her next move would be to deny everything and try to patch things up with David. So I went straight to Emily and laid out a plan. I contacted Emily, David's mistress, and offered her a deal. I told her that I knew about the affair, that I had exposed it to Sarah, and that I was willing to help her if she cooperated with me. I proposed a plan to publicly humiliate David and Sarah, to expose their lies and deceit to the entire world. Emily was hesitant at first, afraid of the consequences, but I convinced her that it was the only way to get what she wanted. She had been dreaming of a life with David, a life of luxury and happiness, but she knew that he would never leave Sarah. I offered her a way out, a way to finally get rid of Sarah and claim David for herself. My plan was simple but effective. I would leak the details of David's affair to the media, along with evidence of his financial wrongdoings. This would create a scandal so massive that it would be impossible for him to recover. He would lose his business, his reputation, and his wife. Emily would then step in, offering him comfort and support, positioning herself as his savior. She would be there for him when everyone else had abandoned him, proving her love and loyalty. He would be so grateful that he would have no choice but to leave Sarah and marry her. Emily agreed to my plan, her eyes gleaming with ambition. She was tired of being the other woman, tired of hiding in the shadows. She wanted to be David's wife, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. Together, we finalized the details of our plan, coordinating our actions, ensuring that everything would go smoothly. We knew that it was a risky move, that we could both face serious consequences if we were caught, but we were willing to take the chance. We were united by our hatred for David and Sarah, our desire for revenge, and our determination to get what we deserved. The stage was set. The trap was laid. All that was left was to spring it. I provided Emily with all the evidence I had gathered against David, including the recording of his incriminating phone call, the transcripts of his emails, and the documents detailing his financial wrongdoings. I instructed her to leak the information to the same journalist who had exposed David's initial crimes. I knew that she would jump at the opportunity to break another huge story, and I trusted her to handle the information responsibly. Emily followed my instructions perfectly. She contacted the journalist, presenting her with the evidence and painting a picture of David as a ruthless and manipulative man. She portrayed herself as a victim, a naive young woman who had been seduced by his charm and wealth. The journalist was intrigued, and she agreed to run the story, promising to protect Emily's identity. The article was published a few days later, and it sent shockwaves through the community. The headline screamed, "Local businessman implicated in new scandal, affair with secretary exposed." The article detailed David's affair with Emily, along with evidence of his financial wrongdoings and his attempts to cover them up. The public was outraged. David's reputation was shattered beyond repair. His business was ruined. His marriage was over. Sarah filed for divorce, demanding a substantial settlement. David was left with nothing but shame and regret. Emily stepped in, offering him comfort and support just as we had planned. She was there for him when everyone else had abandoned him, proving her love and loyalty. He was so grateful that he had no choice but to propose marriage. She accepted, and they were married in a small, private ceremony. But even that wasn't enough for me. I still wasn't done. The final act of my revenge was the sweetest of all, and it was about to unfold. The wedding photos were plastered all over social media. Emily in a white dress that probably cost more than my entire apartment, David looking like a cornered animal, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. They thought they had won. They believed that by solidifying their union, they had somehow immunized themselves against further attacks. They were wrong. My final move was subtle, elegant, and utterly devastating. I waited until they returned from their honeymoon, until the dust had settled, until everyone had grown weary of the scandal and moved on to the next juicy piece of gossip. Then, I released the evidence I had been holding back, the proof that David had been systematically embezzling funds from his own company for years, not just to fund his lavish lifestyle, but also to pay off Emily's debts and shower her with gifts. The evidence was irrefutable: bank statements, wire transfers, and signed documents that even his high-priced lawyers couldn't explain away. The authorities swooped in, and David was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. His assets were frozen, his accounts seized, and his freedom was revoked. He was facing decades in prison, his life reduced to a cell and a jumpsuit. Emily, too, was caught in the crossfire. Although she wasn't directly involved in the financial crimes, she was accused of being an accomplice, of knowingly benefiting from David's illegal activities. Her reputation was tarnished, her social circle evaporated, and her dreams of a life of luxury were shattered. She was left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret and the crushing weight of her own ambition. The scene played out exactly as I had envisioned it. David's face, once so full of arrogance and self-assurance, crumbled before my eyes as he was led away in handcuffs. The cameras flashed, the reporters shouted questions, and the world watched as his empire came crashing down around him. Sarah, who had initially seemed to recover from the affair and the divorce, found herself dragged back into the spotlight, forced to relive the humiliation and betrayal all over again. She lost her friends, her social standing, and her peace of mind. She became a pariah, haunted by the ghosts of her past. As for Emily, the image of her standing outside the courthouse, tears streaming down her face, her designer clothes rumpled and stained, was a masterpiece of poetic justice. She had traded her soul for a life of wealth and privilege, and in the end, she had lost everything. The final nail in their coffin was when the company collapsed under the weight of David's betrayals. Investors pulled out, and employees found themselves unemployed. This economic devastation further crippled the community, amplifying the impact of their wrongdoings and solidifying their legacy as villains. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a quiet observer of the chaos I had unleashed. The satisfaction was profound, a deep sense of closure that I had never thought possible. They had taken everything from me, stripped me bare, and left me for dead. Now they were the ones who were broken, humiliated, and alone. They had lost their money, their status, their freedom, and their dignity. They had lost everything, and I just smiled. Some people might call it excessive. Some might say that I had gone too far, but they weren't the ones who had been betrayed, manipulated, and discarded. They didn't know what it felt like to have their trust shattered, their dreams crushed, and their life turned upside down. They didn't understand the burning desire for justice, the unwavering need to make things right. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's a primal instinct, a way of restoring balance to a world that has been thrown out of kilter. It's not about seeking pleasure or reveling in the suffering of others. It's about reclaiming what was stolen, about standing up for yourself, and about sending a message that you will not be silenced, you will not be ignored, and you will not be victimized. It's about survival. It's about taking back control. It's about finally being free. The scars they left will likely remain, but they are now a reminder of my strength, my resilience, and my unwavering commitment to justice. The nightmare is finally over, and I am finally awake. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.